Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Sage's webinar, all about beating the January blues. Now, really, it's not just about January. We're talking about how accounting firms can help, let's say, smooth out the workflow, be working ahead of deadlines, and delivering great client experience. Now, this webinar is recorded, but also I encourage you to use the opportunity for Q&A if you have any questions, which we would like to ask our expert panel today. And our expert panel is myself, Chris Downing, Director for Accountants and Bookkeepers here at Sage. I've been at Sage just under 5 years. Prior to that, I was accountant by trade for nearly 20 years. I speak to an awful lot of accountants and bookkeepers. I'm very much in with the industry and listening and understanding the challenges as they evolve. But also, I'm joined today by Samantha Mitcham. So Sam, could you give the audience a quick brief of who you are, what you do, and your experience as well, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chris. So my name's Sam Mitcham. I run an accountancy practice on the Lancashire-Yorkshire border, SJCM Accountancy, which I set up in 2019. We're now up to around 250 clients, myself and 2 members of staff.
Thank you, Sam. So when we consider what we're talking about, yes, January is not getting any easier. When you consider what self-assessment is all about, what is the requirements from HMRC this January expected 12.2 million tax returns to be hitting their portal, but only 10.2 actually arrived, which means there's still 2 million tax returns which were going to be late. But also, when you think about the major headline item being the fact there was the 630,000 returns filed on the very last day, being the 31st of January, that's quite a sizable percentage of those returns who are actually filed. So when we consider, let's say, self-assessment, which has been, let's say, the bread and butter of accountants and bookkeepers world for nearly 25 years, it certainly isn't getting any easier. Clients are either leaving for the last moment, accountants are struggling to get all their clients filed on time, which means that there is always that anxiety, there's that additional workload, and also that the necessity almost to put your practice on pause. And I think this is the realization, is that the accountancy industry is possibly the only industry where they actually put their clients first, which is right, but actually put on pause their own businesses, whether that's taking on new clients, implementing new systems, thinking about their growth or their scaling plans. So I firmly believe that that little thing called Making Tax Digital, which was the headline act for maybe for the last 12, 18 months in terms of what we were all thinking about and speaking about, is now well and truly into the future. It's not that far into the future. So when you consider how many Januaries we've got to go until April 2026, MTD in whatever shape or form it may actually be in terms of turnover thresholds or in terms of the requirements and digital record keeping, we haven't got that much time to actually take hold of, let's say, self-assessment. And it's not just self-assessment, it's year-end accounts prep for limited companies, because when you consider there are 4 million or so self-employed individuals who need a tax return completed, as well as landlords, and there's another 4 million or so limited companies as well. So that's an awful lot of work which need to be prepared. So tax return season, whether that starts in October, November time, ekes into January, it's here. But there's something we need to do differently. And this is the purpose of today's webinar, understanding the challenges and understanding what we can do differently to actually flatten out the workload and take control of all client matters. Now, I've been talking about January, Sam, but January, it's not that far away in the past, but how was it for you? And what have you also heard in the marketplace, talking to your fellow colleagues and peers in the accounting industry?
Yeah, so it wasn't a fun one, but when is it ever a fun time for accountants? Personally, for myself and my practice, I dare say it was the busiest yet, the most hectic yet. I think with MTD in mind, we had a lot more to think about. You know, we're kind of approaching things a bit different now, aren't we? Because we know, although they keep delaying it, that MTD is going to come in. So we kind of got 2 sides to how we're planning to improve January. In terms of how was it for other accountants, it's amazing how many I heard say the words, "This is the worst yet." But we hear that year on year. And I think this is the thing about January, is that every year we promise ourselves never again. And then the subsequent Januaries, we're saying the same things time and time again.
Yeah, and I think that promise also leaks into the fact that we are there to service our clients. We don't want our clients to get into trouble. And I think one of the insights I've picked up certainly this year, whether that's side conversations with HMRC or actually speaking to other practitioners, is the fact that the number of estimated returns which were filed towards the end of January has probably felt larger than any other year, which basically means is why are returns being filed as estimates? It's effectively because you probably have not got the information. I think therefore it's a case of, yes, January is getting more challenging with the information not coming in, but also it's very easy to be, let's say, losing sight of the fact that accounting firms come in all shapes and sizes, don't they? And I think it's like the fact that you can probably see on social media some accounts saying, yeah, January is sorted in October, but really the mass market is all about thinking about how do we deliver this January season as well. And is that the right thing to approach take, is actually forget what other accountants are doing, actually think about what you're doing as a practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it can be very easy to kind of get sucked into that whole, well, my practice had that as done by October or November, or some practices will talk about saying no to new clients after a certain point, looking after the client base they've got. And I can see the beauty in you know, all of those things. But I think it does have to come down to the type of practice you're running. Like for me personally, I'm running a practice where I'm very much trying to keep that friendly local feel accountant going, although I serve clients all over the country. We still want to be that first accountant that the local tradesman that's forgot to do his tax return and it's, you know, the 25th of January. We still want to be the first name that kind of comes up in a conversation. So you can't keep that, but then be turning away the new clients in January. So I think it's a real fine line. And I think as accountants, you're totally right. We do want to help our clients and we want to help the community around us. And we want to be there for as many of them as possible. But I think on the flip side to that, what we need to kind of think about is what is that doing to us, our practices, our staff, the stress levels, you know, within the practice. Is it the right way to go about things? I don't know. I think there's beauty in both sides of it. You and I, Chris, both know of practices that very much do get the tax returns done, you know, by November at the latest. And if they do let any come through after that point, they will put quite hefty, you know, penalty charges or whatever you want to call it, a higher fee rate on that work. Again, I can see the beauty in it, but I still feel like the majority of the industry will flap around all the way through January trying to get as many over the line as possible. Yeah. Which is, let's face it, that's where estimated tax returns come from, because it will get to that point where we say to the client, can you please authorize us to submit an estimate, and then we will go forward into February. And then that's when this whole, we're now dripping into February with what should have been a January deadline. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, and I think that leakage into February is so important to realise, is because people think it's a January deadline, but actually I think for accountants it spreads very much into February, whether that's just dealing with the snags and the last minuters, or those new clients who drop the records on the 30th saying, can you do a set of accounts? But also the fact that you're closer to your clients than ever before. Your clients want you to do VAT returns, so you've got the 7th of February deadline, and that workload is very much present going into February, as well as maybe trying to deal with half term and all those other themes of, let's say, trying to speak to clients you promise to have a conversation with. So that headroom and the ability to manage workload has probably been more important than ever. So are you seeing that historical lull which used to exist in February, March, now no longer existing? Because I think that traditionally was a time when, let's take a pause on our practice, let's focus on planning ahead. But I don't think we have that time anymore, do we?
No, I don't think we do have that time anymore, and I think there's a few reasons behind that. Firstly, I think that accountants are working to capacity. There is so much work out there at the moment. You know, and I know a lot of other practices do get constant leads week in, week out, you know, and the growth of the practice is that, you know, majority of the time you'll have too many clients before you get that next staff member. So therefore you're always working to or very near to capacity. So that's an obvious factor in why we're all flapping in January. But I think the other side to it is that let's call it the old-fashioned, not saying there's anything wrong with it, but the old-fashioned way of a practice being set up was very much accounts, payroll, personal tax, and you'd have these departments. And I think that's where that lull came from, because all of the stress of the personal tax season was pushed into the personal tax department. Yes, everybody felt it and everybody was working towards the same deadline, but it was the personal tax department that were really feeling that stress. So then that department was the one that, you know, come February, March, you'd have CTAs doing admin because actually they'd done all the tax returns, and what are they then going to do? And I think one of the reasons that that has now closed is because practices are a lot more inclined to have maybe pods of people that are managing certain client bases, or they've just kind of taken away that department structure of the practice, so that actually you do have, you know, people taking jobs right the way through from bookkeeping through to accounts and tax preparation. So I think there's a few reasons why we're not feeling that lull. I also think that you're totally right that we are offering clients more and more services. And the natural thing when it comes to November, December, Jan is that all other work gets pushed to one side. So then come February, we've got such a backlog that that lull just doesn't exist. If anything, I would say that February is one of the next most stressful months. And then once you're into March, obviously, then you're approaching a new tax year. So then the whole cycle starts again, because then your subcontractors, for example, all want their next tax returns doing really quickly. So it is just an ever-going kind of chain of events, really.
Yeah, so clearly for the sole practitioner with maybe 1 or 2 employees, you're doing all the jobs. But I'm also seeing in the larger firms, as you say, that pod mentality, the role of the general practice practitioner has really come back. The ability to do accounts prep, the ability to do tax returns, all in, let's say, that same small group, which effectively means that you're always on it, you're always living the services, but also there isn't any of that lull. So we recognise that January needs to be fixed, but we've been thinking about fixing January year after year. A number of times we're never going to have a January like that. So what, in your view, is that main challenge or the barrier to why we've never, let's say, solved that January problem? What are the key things?
I think the information coming in from the client, we're always going to have that as one of the issues. And I think, you know, as much as we can try to change the habits of a lifetime of certain clients, I think until MTD does come in and until HMRC makes certain things the law, instead of it just being, we would like you to get your information in by, I think that we are always going to be, let's say, fighting a losing battle with certain clients. But that said, I always do say as the practice owner that I take ownership, responsibility and the blame for January being hectic, because I know for a fact it doesn't have to be that way, because I can see other practices that have got it nailed on and that are not experiencing that kind of mad rush in the same way. So I think definitely the information is kind of one aspect to it. But for me, the other main, let's say, problem here is that it's hard to change habits of a lifetime, and that's not just habits of a lifetime of clients, that's habits of a lifetime of us, you know, from being in the industry since the day I left school. This is how it's always been. So actually I'm having, and I am making changes this year, but I'm having to be very, very disciplined with myself, because people don't like change, and to actually start doing self-assessments a lot earlier than we usually would, but also a lot earlier than clients want them doing, in a respect, because some clients will feel like they've only just done the last one, and then you start chasing them for information. And I think kind of my final point here is it's surprising how little information is actually available at this time of year. So obviously, like your subcontractors, yet they can probably get you all the information that you need, but there are plenty of clients that have employment income, or clients that have share portfolios or bank interest. All of these elements, actually, the information doesn't come through. It should, because it should all be electronic. It's 2023, but that's not always the reality. And it's amazing. In fact, should I say it, should I not? I have a client who had a short stint of employment for HMRC who hasn't got his P60 yet. So go figure that one out. You know, you do the payroll year end and send your P60s, but in reality, sometimes it doesn't happen like that. And until that deadline date of people receiving P60s, for example, they're not always there. So we can't always, you know, as much as even if clients are willing to send the information in early, it can't always be guaranteed that it'll all be available.
Yeah, very correct, because even though HMRC are doing their best to try and surface all the information available around the individual before you get the tax return, whether it's the P60s, the P11Ds, or even, let's say, a capital gain, having to submit that within now 60 days of actually generating it, still things fall through the gaps, don't they? And even though what you do see on HMRC, we've always known the experiences of where the number isn't quite right, and we have to validate it with something else. So therefore, information isn't just what HMRC is informing us with, It's also how we validate that information with source information from the clients, as well as those clients who are trading. So getting that information to do the bookkeeping, but also we're dealing with limited companies and the directors, make sure you can source dividends, go to the paperwork. It just takes time to collate, verify, double check, inform the client of what's going on. And then also they want to know, what is my tax liability next year? There's always conversations. That's the information side, which we'll probably talk about in a moment. But I think the change element is probably the most important. And I think the reality is the fact that I think clients are willing to change, but you need to have the conversation. So surely some of the change challenges are probably in the chair of the business, of the accountant, the business owner, to reflect upon. So let's sort of take a view of that. So when we think about change, whether it's primarily digitizing the practice or thinking about how we apply new systems or processes, there are certain moments in time or certain periods within the year. Clearly, very challenging to put any change management within January or in February, but certainly before the year, and I think is really important. Whether that's a conversation as part of tax planning, because clients love to have an understanding in terms of what they need to do before the financial year is over, in terms of what they could do to save tax, whether it's buying equipment or paying a bonus or thinking about investments into an ISAs. So that conversation is key because clients are willing to actually invest in something to save tax. And whether that's be thinking about digital tools to actually start capturing information is really important. But when you've got, let's say, those other themes throughout the year, whether that's payments on account in July, whether it's P11D submissions, or actually when you have a limited company where you've got a filing deadline which doesn't really coincide with any of the dates, these are all points in time where a conversation is really impactful. But we all appreciate that we need to try and get clients, or the trading clients, limited current clients, sole traders, partnerships, using digital tools, whether that's capturing an invoice or actually using proper bookkeeping tools to keep on top of their affairs, because I think our lives are a little bit easier if we're working with live data or semi-processed data rather than an Excel spreadsheet, which may be sort of 3 or 4 months out of date, if not longer. So, Sam, when you're thinking about your practice and what are you going to change this year to make life a little bit easier, what's the biggest change element you're going to bring to your practice this year, or have already done so from the back of January?
Yeah, so so the idea was to put a pause on new clients. I call it a pause rather than saying stop taking on new clients, because that makes it feel less definitive and a bit more temporary. So the biggest change is putting a pause on taking on new clients. The reason I want to do that is because kind of the proof is in the pudding. I've seen a couple of other practices do it and have a really high success rate, not only of being able to catch up on any internal kind of systems and processes or just client work that they wanted to get on top of, but actually quite an outstanding number of clients that will hang on for your services. So obviously there'll always be clients ringing up that need something doing immediately, but actually the majority of them probably don't need onboarding there and then. And to kind of get that waiting list in place of onboarding new clients is something that I've put a lot of thought into. What I am seeing on the back end of that is that there's a real 50-50 divide with accountants that I'm speaking to. Some of them will be like, absolutely not, I would never have a waiting list for new clients, like that's absolutely alien to us, we're always going to take on because you can just grow with the number of clients. But then there are other practices that are saying it's one of the most powerful things they've ever done. So that's why I've decided that at least to give it a go. At the end of the day, what's the worst that can happen is a few are going to slip through the net. But as I said previously, there is a lot of work out there at the moment. In terms of changing patterns and the way that the work's being done, I have, and it is very simple, but it is actually proving very effective. To say that we're not far off the end of the second month in the current tax year, I've simply looked at the number of self-assessment tax returns that we have, divide it by 12, and absolutely committing myself to get 1/12 done every month. Like, it's a no-brainer. And of course, some are going to, I'm going to gain potentially more clients at the back end of the year, and maybe some will drop off. And there's always going to be kind of a little bit of fluctuation there. But really, it's such a simple way of looking at it. Well, if we can be doing this work as of now, then why not start doing it now?
Yeah, and so I think the two elements there. One is actually having little mini targets for yourself in terms of how you're going to actually deliver the self-assessment tax returns or even limited company accounts. But I think that taking a pause on taking on new clients is brave, but also possibly the right thing to do, because I remember being in practice, you get a phone call from a prospect. You get all excited about it. You want to get involved. You want to understand their business, ask all those questions, demonstrate your knowledge, because that's what we want to do, accountants. We want to show that we really understand our tax knowledge, and you start to get yourself buried in to actually say, I want to win this client. But that takes time. And when you think the key remit of removing the January blues is to deliver work well ahead of deadlines, what are the priorities? The priority is going to be your existing clients. And by servicing them appropriately, meeting their expectations in terms of sharing information about their tax liabilities, and more importantly, mitigating any risk of any upsetting clients. Because we get excited about winning clients, we get even more upset about losing clients, and that will mitigate that as well. So I perfectly agree. I think that view of taking a pause, and I'll use pause as the loosest sense for you, Sam, because I know you'll still be taking on clients. I think it's probably one of the bravest things. So we've been talking about the requirement to get information into the practice, and I think getting clients onto software is very important. What is the best time in your view in terms of getting clients on board? Is it, let's say, partway through the year, at the beginning of the year? But if you've got clients in April with a March year end, it's like, well, that's been and gone. So how are you getting clients on board to using software? What's the right time in your view?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, this, because at the end of the day, in an ideal world, we would have every client on software from a certain point in the year, being the start of the tax year. But the reality is we're never going to be able to do that, because, you know, internally we wouldn't have time to onboard them all at the same time, to train them on the software. So the way I think about this is, yes, the ideal time to get a sole trade client with a 5th of April year end onto software would be the 6th of April. But how I look at this is, we can play catch up and kind of insert that information up to a certain point. The client can start using that software at any time during the tax year. It's not ideal, but what it does do is it then gives them a bit of a practice run. So if I was to put a sole trade client onto a Sage subscription from the 1st of June, that means they've got until the 5th of April, where actually we could just treat that as a bit of a test run. Let's see how you do on this software. We're going to have an input to get the historic information on anyway. So by the time we're into the next tax year, for 24 to 25, let's hope that the client's confident we're using the software. We've pulled them up on any errors that they've been making up to that point, and then we can go forward, and actually every year on from there should be a lot neater. So I think we almost have to forget the ideal world situation when it comes to getting clients onto software. And what we actually need to focus on is find the client at their most kind of, well, let's say find the client at the point where they're most likely to accept going onto the software. So I might have a sole trade client ring me up and say, my mortgage advisor says that I need figures up to date as of today to get some projections, or, you know, I'm trying to get a bank loan and they won't let me do this without this. That's the pain point of that client. Capture it and say, do you remember that piece of software that I recommended to you 6 months ago? You said you didn't want to go on. If you'd have took me up on that, I could have given you this information and we could have had a look at your P&L to date. So I think things like that, things like reminding clients that if we can have a quick look at your numbers, there might be a potential to reduce your payment on account before July, or actually we might need to pre-warn you that your payment on account isn't likely to be you know, enough to cover your tax liability, so you'll have a higher payment in January. All of these things, we have to kind of reverse psychology this on the client and make that software be something good for them and not something that's an inconvenience to them that we're implementing to just be good for us.
They're very true. And I think to summarize that in one place, or in 3 different ways, is that we're trying to get clients to use digital bookkeeping tools. I think the best way to do that is with client education, storytelling, and demonstrating a return on investment or meeting their goals. And I think that client education is really important. It's creating awareness that if they want to be better organized, be on top of their taxes, understand what cash they've got or not got, having access to information in real time is key. That's bookkeeping tools. And as an accountant, you have hundreds of clients, or you have experiences with clients over your how many years of being trading as an accountant, of where clients have been more successful, where they've had visibility to their numbers, where they perhaps be able to solve problems because they're using bookkeeping tools, and that creates that awareness that they need to do something differently. But also, how many times do we actually speak to a client and say, what are you trying to achieve over the next 6 months, 12 months, couple of years? Are they thinking of getting a mortgage? Are they thinking of moving house? Are they thinking of retirement? All of that is made easier. You've got access to the information. You can give that advice and guidance. And this is all about that conversation, because do you agree? Is that the sort of remit which you usually take when you actually try and get those clients who even more struggling to think, why do I need to use software?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. There's such a power in that storytelling element, and you have to prove to the client what the benefit is. We know what the benefits are as accountants because we've been through this before. We all talk these days as if everybody's been on this kind of daily, weekly, even monthly, like bookkeeping cycle forever, but they haven't. Like, it wasn't that long ago, prior to MTD for VAT, that actually a limited company client that's VAT registered might have only been dropping the records off in a carrier bag once a quarter. But we've kind of already forgot that we have a lot of stories about the beauty of up-to-date, accurate bookkeeping because we've been there, seen it and done it. It just feels a little bit out of reach for sole traders sometimes because they are smaller businesses, it is smaller numbers, and they have less compliance to do, and especially, with not being VAT registered, in the back of our heads, we know that bookkeeper doesn't have to yet be digital. And the client knows that as well, and there was all the speak about MTD and now that's gone away. So all those clients are now sitting back again and thinking, oh, I don't have to do that yet. So I think exactly what you said there, Chris, what we need to do is tell the story to the client of why and how it can be so much better for them. And actually, they never go on to software and then insist to come off it again. That's never happened. They might every now and then want to switch softwares because they've got a gripe within it, but I've never had a client, the smallest of business owner, hairdresser, beauticians, whatever they are. I've never had one go into a bookkeeping software as a sole trader and then say, actually, I'd like to go back to my manual cash book and I'd like to do it once a year at the year end.
That's the whole point. It is a better experience using digital tools, but also the fact that you've touched on small business owners. They haven't got CIS, they haven't got VAT as a requirement, but these small business owners, their biggest liability is income tax, something which they possibly do not know or have any idea about until 6 to 9 months after their year end. So with the MTD stick no longer there, what's the carrot? And I suspect is the fact that clients would love to know what their tax liability could be within a pinch, within a couple £100 or an estimate within the year, because they can save for it. If they can save for their tax, they'll know what cash they've got spare to actually go on nice holidays, have better cars, and do whatever they want to do as an individual. So I think that those points around tax saving or tax awareness is probably one of the key drivers to actually getting clients onto software, especially with the smaller ones. And because Sam, even though you're very well at trying to give sensible estimates to your clients in terms of what taxes are, life would be easier if they could actually probably have an understanding of their business performance at the same time, wouldn't it? Do you think that tax driver is important in the conversation?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, with payments on account, just as an example, like approaching July and talking about that July payment on account, to be able to say to the client, oh, and if you have your up-to-date numbers, if you're on software, and for the ones that are on software, we can then give them a good indication of how things are going to look by January. It's very, very valuable to us and to the client. We can offer them a better service. I think one thing to point out whilst we're talking about the tax liabilities is that sole traders and small business owners can sometimes have a bit of a misconception about when the tax is due. And one thing I've kind of got to grips with over the years is that you have to explain to these clients that just because they do their tax return earlier and they know what the liability is earlier doesn't mean that it's due to be paid any earlier. And I think a lot of the smallest of clients, the sole trade business owners, can be caught in this kind of trap of thinking especially the ones that are not in the payments on account system, it's nearly January, so I'll know what my tax is soon and I'll have to pay it. But that's not how it has to be, and to re-educate those clients and to say, did you know that I could actually tell you what that tax is, but on like the 8th of April, if you were super efficient, you'd still have until the following January to settle that liability. And I think that's a misconception that it's just important to communicate. And you don't have to communicate with all your clients individually. At the end of the day, it's one social media post where your clients hang out, whether that be Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And then you've told them that. And then even if it just captures one or two, to then go, oh yeah, it's a good point. Maybe I will give that software a try. So it is all about those kind of communication piece, really.
Now, we've been talking an awful lot about software, and it's been software for the clients in terms of digitizing their own records. But we also spoke the fact that a lot of the change needs to exist in the hands and the view of the business owner, the accountant who sat in the chair. And it's like, when you invoke change and bring change into the practice, what themes should we be looking at? Because when you look at the process of what an accountant goes through, whether that's winning clients or onboarding them, maintaining the bureaucracy and the admin of letters of engagements, AML and risk assessment, all of those themes can now be digitized, can be automated, can be made easier with software. Then you think about managing your clients. I think is so important, having visibility of which clients you've got, what their due dates are, what the responsibilities are, what software they're using or not using, what other compliance deadlines have they got. But also, when you think about accessibility to the tools, your clients will always want a little bit more. They want to not just have access to their tax liabilities, they're looking for you to seek guidance and advice in terms of what they can do next, whether that's cash flow planning or thinking about how they're going to grow and scale their own businesses. But at the end of the day, when you think about the tools available, Sage are doing our utmost to provide all the tools that you need as a practice. So we have addressed all these concerns with like sort of Go Proposal, the ability to price your clients, have consistency, which is great because then you actually know you're not missing a trick. AML, risk assessment, letter of engagements, they're all time-hungry exercises, which can be very paper-based, but are now digitized. And we've also got all the bookkeeping tools as well as compliance tools you need, as well as the reporting tools like Futurely. So all the services are there to use as software to improve, create efficiency, create capacity for your practice. But actually what we need to be thinking about is actually how do we actually invoke change, and actually how do we bring those tools within to our practice. So when we think about what is the blueprint to removing the January blues, I think one of the key things is actually setting the right goals and KPIs for you as an accountancy practice. So Sam, you've touched on the idea that you've looked at how many returns you need to basically get submitted on a monthly basis. Are there any other elements to that within your practice, whether that's limited companies, which you're looking at in terms of actually what are your targets and what are the targets you think practices should actually use?
Yeah, again, I think it is very personal to the practice, but that said, I don't think there's many practices that enjoy or think that it's a good thing to be working to deadline. So I think a recent thing that I've put in place is that we now have target dates. So anything that has a deadline, whether it be a VAT return, a CIS submission, or a company year end, or a personal tax return, I've implemented target dates rather than just having this huge list of clients that may all need self-assessments doing, or the lists of company year ends that, yes, they do have different year ends, but you do find that there are peaks in the year ends. You know, a lot of companies have a March year end, for example. We've now implemented target dates for all of the bits of work. So the target date is the first point of call, to the point where actually the deadline date is now, and can be in the software that I'm using, hidden column. So don't worry about the deadline date, because the target date's before that. And that's been quite powerful, just in terms of getting out of the mentality of working towards a deadline. We should be working to, in an ideal world, get all the limited companies submitted 3 months after the year end, unless there's a reason why not to.
And what has been, that's been your aspiration. And I know speaking to you, there's the ability to actually take on your first members of staff, and there may be the ability to actually, and confidence to delegate work. I think that's another way of actually, say, maybe setting the goals of you as a practice owner, is doing less of the actual bookkeeping, data processing work, and do more of the reviewing. So how important is that delegation in terms of your goals this year?
Incredibly important. Without that delegation piece, your practice can't grow. And I think we could do a webinar on this alone, as from the point of view of a small practice owner. Delegation is definitely one of the hardest things that I've had to overcome. You produce this practice and you've nurtured it from day one, and you've got connections with clients, and you want to be the only person to control this and that because it's easier to do it yourself, or because somebody might get it wrong, and you've got such an emotional attachment to the business. I think that delegation is a very, very difficult thing, but actually once you've done it, it's like a breath of fresh air every time. Every task that I've handed on that I never thought I would, looking back retrospectively, I go as if I was still doing that at that point.
And why didn't you do it sooner? Isn't it?
Exactly.
There's that fear
Every
factor
time.
of something will go wrong. But what can go wrong? You're still in complete control. And I believe the goal setting, the deadlines, and also the delegation can only be achieved if you really understand your client base. And I talk about client segmentation, whether it was MTD for VAT or planning ahead for MTD for ITSA, but even just actually managing your practice, segmentation is so powerful. It's not just understanding what entity type there are, what is their year end, what type of bookkeeping tools they use or don't use, their propensity to learn, but that actually stretches out what services you're offering and ultimately what can you delegate in what sort of order. So in terms of how you're using that sort of segmentation exercise or a process, how important has that been to you in terms of actually getting the work done faster?
Yeah, really important. And it is very important to me to have that segmentation in place and to be able to tailor it depending on the task that we're looking at. When MTD was coming into play, or we thought it was coming into play, it was very important for me to segment clients into how likely they were to take it in a good way and which ones were going to have the most kickback, because actually they were the ones I needed to work on first. But now that we've got the delay at MTD, for me, it's more about segmenting the client base so that I can offer training to certain sectors. If we're focusing on how to use software, for example, I can segment my client base with a click of a button into everybody in the hair and beauty industry, because actually what I've been doing is creating Loom videos of how to use the software for that certain type of client. And it saved me a lot more time than I thought it would. And that is just because you repeat yourself so much to so many clients about so many subjects. So that's why I've really taken to doing these videos. And I'm even planning on taking it a step further and potentially running kind of seminars for clients of how to use software. But your problem without the segmentation piece with doing that is that, let's focus on somebody in trades, so a builder and a hairdresser. Actually, they use the software in very, very different ways because they're paid in different ways. They have different, a different cash to card to bank transfer ratio. All these factors mean that actually to tailor the bookkeeping training in a certain way will be a lot more valuable for those clients. But back to the segmentation, if I wasn't able to do that with the client list very easily, it would be very difficult for me to then kind of tailor who I was speaking to and about what.
And I love the way you're using Loom videos, because that's a lovely way to scale up that advice and guidance. You do it once and you could probably apply that video to similar clients, but also it still maintains that human touch because they want to speak to you. They want to understand, you want to explain things in detail, which is never quite the same with a letter or an email or a WhatsApp message, because you're trying to construct it in a way and it takes time. But to record what you're doing and sharing it means they can watch it in their own time, and it's something which is repeatable, which goes very nicely in terms of actually possibly choosing the right digital tools. Because when you think about digital tools, it's not just about bookkeeping, it's about all the tools which are available. And I touched upon earlier in terms of whether it's winning new clients proposal management, it's data automation tools, taking a picture of an invoice and getting them scanned, but also it's using other elements of technology. So Sam is using Loom videos to actually showcase what she's doing with her staff in terms of actually maybe working papers, but also actually how that message can be spread, and in terms of educating her clients in terms of how to use various bits of software. But Sam, when you think about all the pieces of technology out there, how do you find the right technology you want to use? How much experimentation, how much downtime are you spending to actually experiment with what's out there, and where do you learn what to use?
It's difficult. It is difficult because there's a lot of noise surrounding every element of technology, whether you're talking about bookkeeping or practice management. I think as much as it is important to listen to, what other accountants are saying and their experiences, I think for me the best way of kind of deciding which piece of software to use is very much to take a demo, or not necessarily a demo of in terms of somebody trying to sell you their kit, because then they'll always make it look wonderful. But in terms of if you can get that log on, even if it means that you're paying for a month and you're running somebody's bookkeeping for a month that you might then get rid of, I think a lot of the time you will log on to a piece of software and go, no, it's not for me, because you just automatically, maybe it's not visual enough, or it doesn't have the elements that you need. But it will then narrow down that decision piece. So for me, it's all about actually getting stuck in and using the software. And I don't think until you do that, anything on screen is going to be enough. I think it's like, let's take Sage as an example. People might have used the bookkeeping 6 months ago to a year ago and be thinking, oh, maybe I should have another look at it. Don't think about it, just do it. Just get the subscription and give it a go, because even if you lose 1 month's fee, it's nothing. And I think for me, it's very much worth it. You've got to try the piece of software. And just on the back end of that, I think it's very important to remember that we are allowed to make mistakes when it comes to choosing software, whether that be that you've got 500 clients using one piece of bookkeeping software and you now want to change it. Very scary concept, but is possible. Or whether it's a case of actually you've been running with a practice management suite for a month and then you think, oh, I think I've made a mistake. Allow yourself to make the mistake, learn from it, get over it, and correct it.
Yeah, I think there are two main aspects there. Is the technology is always evolving, and I've seen that working in Sage for the last 5 years. The acceleration, the growth, the innovation, the variety, and how the products are growing month on month in terms of capabilities, functionality, which means you should always have another dip into the software if you've not seen it for a while. But also, it's really important to be thinking about who you hear, speak to peers, understanding how the products work, but also making best use of the software providers, because they're going to teach you, show you how it can be used. And therefore, it's important also to understand that cloud is an amazing, I would say, capability of creating change. Because in the good old days with desktop tools, it was really change hungry, time hungry, bring in a new process. But with cloud, you can sample something new, you can migrate data across, and you can import data from one system to another. So whether you made the right or the wrong or the poor decision 6 months, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, you can actually bring in change quite quickly in your practice, one client at a time, without thinking having to throw everything out in one go and start again. I think this is the great thing about cloud and software these days. It's so much easier to actually try new things out. But it's all very well trying new things out, but most accounting firms want to scale, they want to sort of be more profitable. And we've been talking about having conversations with the clients and client segmentation and doing work more effectively. But this all revolves around systemization, doesn't it? It's all about having a process in place. And when you consider, you've been running your own practice, what now, 3 years, 3.5 years now, it's like, what are the most important systemization tools you're using now or wish you had on day one?
I would say practice management, definitely. I think as do many practice owners that are starting with a very minimal client base and starting from scratch, if you like, with minimal funds, minimal clients, you can survive on spreadsheets, you can survive on a kind of a lead document that gives you all the tax references for that client, however that's looking at the beginning before practice management software. You can survive, and you can survive to over 150 clients, because that's what I did, so I know that you can. But in hindsight, I should have had practice management software from day one. The whole practice should have been built on that, as if that was the foundations to what I was building, which it was. You can't build a house without the right foundations, and I think it's definitely one of the biggest mistakes that I made in starting a practice, was not having that foundation practice management software in place from the very start.
I think systemization is also the secret to scaling, or even sort of mitigating key person dependency, because all your client information, all those conversations are probably in your head. But also in terms of with the delegation of work to members of staff, if someone goes on holiday or sick, or you, as the practice grows, you take on new employees, at the end of the day, every client, though their activities may be different, they are a business, they have data which need to be processed. You just create a set of accounts and a tax return, which all can be systemized. And that, I think that is also part of the magic of having a really rock solid system for doing any process within your practice, which means anyone can pick up the job, anyone can actually take that job and move it on to the next stage. but also it means you can actually scale your practice in a way which actually isn't going to disrupt or need new pieces of software. So we're now thinking about how do we spread the word in terms of speaking to our clients, in terms of creating change. So therefore communication is so important. But I think communication has certainly evolved over the last couple of years. Once upon a time, we were receiving letters in the post. When was the last time we ever received a letter from a client? I don't know. But it's coming in from Facebook messages, WhatsApp, emails, text messages. How are you dealing with that sort of wave of communication channels? How do you try and get your clients to change the way that you want them to communicate with you?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, this, and I think there's obviously there's such beauty in the kind of how many different ways of communicating we've got now. As you say, Chris, we used to have to write a letter to a client and then wait for them to open it and wait for them to respond. But the problem is, exactly as you just said, without being very strict with your clients from day one, it's very easy for them to fall into bad habits whereby they're texting you, they're WhatsApping, they're every now and then Facebook Messenger, because when has that become an acceptable way of talking about finances and sensitive information? But I think my top tip here is to always steer the client back to the channels of communication that you want. If you want all your client information to come through a portal, and that is the only way you're willing to communicate, just make that really clear from day one. In my practice, we've got client portals, but the majority of communication is via email or WhatsApp, just because there's obviously a higher level of security on WhatsApp. So if a client does message the SJCM business page on Facebook, I'll just copy and paste their own message into a WhatsApp chat. So I'm kind of forcing them back to the app that I want them to use. And I think you just have to be very strict with that with clients. Like, if a client's contacting you in a way that you don't deem okay, don't let them do it. So don't reply on that app, because if you do, then that's you accepting that they've sent you a text message. Well, if you don't want a copy of a P60 sending as a text message, then make sure you're forcing them back to the communication channels that you want them to use.
So I think the key thing is take control of the communication, taking control of how your client is working with you in terms of how you speak to you and communicate. Also, what are those deadlines? Because it's basically you're providing a service, but you can only provide the services you wish to deliver if information is actually delivered at the right time. So the communication is so important. So we've talked about all these change elements, but at the end of the day, this will not happen unless you save time and create capacity as a business owner. We've learned that the downtime of February, March no longer exists. And quite often, this is when accounting practices plan for the year coming. Well, I don't think that happens. It's probably a rolling plan, which is constantly evolving. So we really put some time aside to actually run our own practices, thinking about how we run and change our businesses. How are you taking that approach? Do you literally take a couple of hours off every Friday, or are you actually always on it? What are you seeing other practitioners do to actually create time to actually run their own business?
I think there are practice owners out there who I really admire for doing this, that have been very strict from day one, whether it be as much as a day a week or just a day or two a month, where they are not doing client facing work. They won't accept any meetings. Staff know not to contact them, and they just work on this background work, if you like, which fundamentally is the most important thing, because without that, the practice will get out of control very, very quickly. Personally, for me, I do try and take a day a month where I make sure that I'm totally kind of blocked out to do that kind of thing. But I'm also aware that it needs to be a lot more than that. But that's why I can often be found working, be it in the evenings or the odd weekend or bank holidays. I love bank holidays for this kind of thing, because clients won't contact you, staff are all off. And, it sounds a little bit sad, but at the end of the day, if that's what works, then that's okay. So I think it's just about finding your own way of segmenting that time off, but make sure that you do block it off, whether that be, every other Saturday you think, right, well, I'm going to work those mornings just so that I can work on the practice. I think it is very important because, again, I will stress that things can get very out of control very quickly if you're not sitting back and looking from the outside in. You know, if you just stay in and you're just working on the deadlines and this, that and the other all the time, then it can be very easy to kind of lose your way with the direction of the practice and getting those systems and processes in place.
Thank you, and thank you for being very honest in terms of how you use the bank holidays, because I think it comes down to your personal time, isn't it? It's your business, how you use your time is personal to you. But I think it's so important is the fact that personal well-being, having headspace, we need to have downtime to actually think about your business, just so important. So one of the key things we've been talking about is how to get information into your practice. And if your clients are trading, whether a sole trader or a limited company, they need to be using bookkeeping tools. So as an accountant or bookkeeper working with Sage, you're already aware of the plans being Sage Start, Standard and Plus. These are ideal for your growing businesses dealing with CIS and VAT. They need in-depth reporting and the ability to work with a variety of external apps. But when one considers the mass market, the sole traders, the simple income expenditure type clients who have no records, some records, a bag of receipts, or maybe an Excel spreadsheet, ideally you want them all to be using some sort of bookkeeping tool, a tool which you can actually systemize within your practice, share easily with your clients, and have the confidence it's got the support. So you may not be aware, but back in April, Sage launched Sage Individual. So our plans for making tax digital never changed with the delay back in December. We needed to actually provide to the market simple digital record keeping tools, which were both mobile as well as browser capabilities for business owners to capture income and expenditure, hook up the ability to bring information from a bank feed, multiple bank feeds. Also, that gives the confidence to the accountant that the client is actually capturing the receipts. So the ability to have OCR or image capture built within the solution, because you want ease of use. You don't want multiple apps, you want a single app. So Sage Individual, which starts at £4 a month for the accountant or bookkeeper, enables the business owner to hook up as many bank feeds as possible, record income and expenditure, post journals, as well as take a picture of an invoice, and that invoice to be automatically read in terms of a supplier details as well as the value, and get posted to the ledgers. So a great tool for getting clients on board to a structured, systemized approach for bookkeeping. But then you'll also have clients which may literally have 1 or 2 transactions a month, really simple clients. And again, you don't want them to be using Excel spreadsheets or no records at all. So individual is also individual free. So this comes with a single bank fee, still the ability to take a picture of an invoice, but you'll manually code up the transactions. The key thing, what we're trying to do is support the accountant and bookkeeper to get all your clients digitized, because you want access to the information within the year to provide the advice and guidance to tax planning. So Sam, you're a member of the Sage advisory panel with in terms of seeing what we've been doing over the last couple of years, our plans for MTD. You've seen how the solution works and the functionality, the capability it has. So with you looking forward to this year and thinking about how do you actually mitigate the January blues and getting the sole traders using a digital tool no matter what it is, you've been using Sage Plan, Start, Standard and Plus for quite some time. How exciting or interested is Sage Individual to actually getting your practice more efficient?
Yeah, it's really powerful. It really is a powerful piece, especially, you know, the fact that it is low cost, but it still does the job. And I think those two things, you know, we've all seen historically, without naming any names, very low cost bookkeeping solutions that actually the data coming out the other side is pretty much useless. So what was the point? Whereas here we've got a low cost entry level software to get them in and get them started on. So it is very powerful because it means that we have scope to introduce this to the smallest of businesses. If those businesses then grow, then we can take them up the ladder of software. But if they don't, you know, there are a lot of lifestyle businesses out there, a lot of businesses that are going to stay very simple in terms of transaction volumes. Then we've now got the product to serve those clients as well.
Now, we've been talking about sole traders. We cannot forget about landlords. And landlords, they probably have the most complex tax affairs, even though the accounting records are quite simple, and they probably want more than what they are prepared to pay for. So I do think that love or loathe landlords is a quite a setting title to this slide. But also it's the fact that Sage hasn't forgotten about landlords, because landlords' bookkeeping needs are actually quite complex, especially if you've got multiple owners of a property or a portfolio of properties. You need to actually produce individual income and expenditure accounts for the individuals to be passed over to the tax returns. But also there are key legislation changes, the fact that landlords will have to meet certain energy ratings in 2025 for brand new properties to rent, and then from 2028 all properties. So when you consider the fact that where you've got landlords who are accidental landlords, they've got maybe a simple buy-to-let, or they're more professional, they have a furnished holiday let, Sage has partnered up with Hammock as a specific landlord tool for doing digital record keeping as well as the reporting needs. So Sam, you have quite a few landlords on your portfolio, but I think what you're finding, because you're very much into the tax planning, is where you get an awful lot of requests from CGT calculations as well, because interest rates increasing. Landlords think about, do I actually sell my portfolio, or think about the future in terms of tax planning and changing allowances. How important is to get your landlords onto a digital bookkeeping tool, because how many of these were you doing in January?
Yeah, the majority were done in January, and I do think, especially for small portfolios of properties, the landlord piece has always been a bit of an add-on, a bit of a glue on to the end. You know, if you've got a sole trader or a company, a limited company director, and then they happen to have one or two properties, it was kind of, oh, can I also have your rental income and expenses? And it's that kind of bolt on, whereas that's not how it should be. The power in something like Hammock, when it comes to the visuality of record keeping, I cannot express strongly enough how useful that is when it comes to doing capital gains tax. To have that little kind of portfolio there on the screen in a cloud, rather than having to ask a client, well, what do you mean you can't remember when you bought it and how much for, you know? But these are things that clients just don't retain that information. So having something like Hammock, it's not only helping year on year with the tax return and meaning that we have that information up to date and live from clients, but also for future tax planning, potential sales of properties, and then subsequent capital gains tax returns.
Thank you. So we're coming to the end of this webinar. I hope everyone's really enjoyed it. So I think the realization, we need to remove the January blues. As a profession, as accountants or bookkeepers, if we want to scale, if we want to grow, improve our personal well-being, maybe go skiing in January if they find the snow, it's all a case, what can we do to actually mitigate the anxiety, the workload between October, November, December, January, and now eking into February. So we need to break the cycle. And I think the key focus is the focus on your practice as your business. What are your goals? What are your ambitions? What do you want to strive to be over the next couple of years before MTD for ITSA actually does land? And that's not going away. It's just been delayed. It's maybe been rephased, but actually the inevitability is small business owners will be digitized at some shape or form. So therefore, client segmentation has got to be so important. Not only is it an opportunity to better understand your client base, but also understand in terms of how you can be more efficient. What digital tools are they using, not using? How can you delegate certain work out? How you can actually scale the practice to be more efficient, but also focusing on those key things in terms of what clients do you want as a practice? Do you put a pause like Sam has on taking on new clients, which means you can concentrate on your existing client base, actually claw back the time and get accounts and tax returns done way ahead of the deadlines? Or do you want to scale up fast and employ more people? Whatever it takes, it's all about having a plan. And then also I focus on about how do you get clients using digital tools. There are perfect times in the year to actually try and get clients using digital for the first time. But if you've got, let's say, a cohort of clients, maybe all your hairdressers or your beauticians or your tradespeople, if you have that cohort together, think about maybe capturing coffee events or whatever it takes to get people in the room. Because with tools like Sage Individual, our brand new plan, which has data capture built into the solution, they can effectively capture all of last year's invoices in one session, get those coded up and be ready for the 22-23 tax year. So there's lots of opportunities, but it all revolves having a conversation, having an ambition, and actually getting involved with your client matters as early as possible. So Sam, when you think about what are the key take homes which viewers this webinar should consider when actually trying to remove the January blues? Is it change management? Is it digitization, or is it having a plan as a practice?
I think the digital record keeping is an absolute given here, but I think ahead of that, it's about educating clients, telling them those stories, making it clear to them why this is the better way to work.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we've come to the end of the webinar. Actually, the conversation has been just so fluid, it's so strong for the last hour. We've actually run out of time for the Q&A. So really, it just comes down to me. So thank you for attending this webinar. Everyone is on the moment. But also thank you very much, Sam, for your insights, information, and educating us all in terms of what you're doing as a practice. So Sage delivering monthly webinars on a variety of different subjects. But if you need any more information, please just reach out to your normal Sage contact. So hopefully everyone has a great afternoon, and hopefully speak to you all soon and see you soon at the next event. Thanks very much, and thank you, Sam.
Thank you.